Hi, I'm Justin Richer, CTO of UberEther, and today I'm going to be talking about everybody's favorite security topic, passwords. You might have seen something in the news about this recently. And passwords have been around since ancient times. But in fact, in the ancient world, passwords were not used the way we use them today. Passwords were all about protecting access to a certain area or a certain space by means of a doorkeeper. So you would have to go up to the locked door, talk to the doorkeeper, and give the doorkeeper the password. That indicated that you were allowed in. Now, this is something that we in the security industry call a shared secret because both you and the doorkeeper need to know what the password is. Now, if it's shared, though, what makes it a secret? The answer to that is that it is the distribution mechanism that you want to protect. Not only is the password itself not something broadly known, but you actually protect who you tell the password to. The fact that somebody has been told the password means that some amount of vetting has taken place so that they are not going to share that password and not going to spread it to people who shouldn't be in the space in the first place. So the password is always about the door. That's right, the password's not about you. It's not about the person. It's not about identifying you at all. The doorkeeper might not have any idea who you are, but if you have the right password, they might let you in. Or if they know exactly who you are, they could either decide that you don't need the password so you can come in anyway because you're welcome in this space. Or even if they know exactly who you are, they could be your best friend since you were 2 years old. They still won't let you in because you don't have the password. Because passwords are fundamentally an authorization technology. That's how they've been used since ancient times. Passwords are not about who you are, but they're about determining whether or not you're worthy to come through that particular door. This isn't how we use passwords in the modern context. Passwords are all about proving the user is who they claim to be. This is an authentication factor. It's called something that you know. At least, that's what it seems like it's supposed to be. Really, it's not just anything that you know, it's something you know that you can type, because only things that you can type make sense in these password-based systems. So we're going to go on in a little adventure today. We're going to create a secure password. We're going to go through and figure out what the difference is between a good password and a bad password and how to make one. We all have probably some internal feeling for what this is like. So let's go. We're going to start off with Word. Not a very good password, is it? But it's memorable. It's something that I know, and it's chosen as a password. Now, in order to get people to pick something that's a little bit harder to guess, we might say, okay, you can't just pick a word like that. You have to have at least 8 characters in it. Okay, fine. I'm going to pick password. It's 8 characters long. It fits all of your rules so far. But this isn't something that is very good either. So we're going to tell people, in addition to this, you also need to have upper and lowercase characters. This seems like this is going to mix it up a lot and get us away from these simple dictionary words. But here's the thing. I'm an English speaker, which means that I know where to put capital letters. They go at the beginning of the word. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to capitalize the word password, and that now fits all your rules. So in order to get people away from that, we're going to add more rules to this and say you need to mix numbers and symbols, and this is going to drastically increase the guessing space so that you can't just use the word password. Funny thing though, a lot of these symbols and numbers look a lot like letters. So I'm probably going to go through and do a couple of substitutions because those dollar signs and S's, I can remember that substitution. That's pretty okay. I'm going to put those in to my password, and now I'm going to fit all your rules. Or maybe I'm going to put punctuation at the end, or maybe I'm going to put the number at the end instead of in the middle. That'll be really clever because nobody's ever thought of that. All of these are really awful passwords. None of them really give us great security. At least it feels like they don't give us great security, even though we've made them a lot more complex and a lot harder to memorize. So let's do some math. This is the Shannon entropy equation, and this is a way to determine how many bits of entropy or randomness are in any given string on its own. So the word word, as you might imagine, doesn't have a whole lot of entropy, only 12 bits. But by going up to password, we have actually more than doubled the amount of entropy just in that one single string. Now you're probably thinking, great, next up we're going to double the character space. So upper and lowercase, this is going to at least double it again, right? No, it went up a little bit, but it really didn't budge all that much. So, okay, we're going to add numbers and symbols, and this is going to make a huge, huge difference because we're not just letters anymore. We're not dictionary words. This is absolutely going to be different. It barely moved. Barely any difference by adding all of those mixed characters in. And when we go to look at the other examples, we see that they do jump up, but I want to point something out here. They're longer. These are 9-character passwords instead of 8. And that's where a lot of the entropy comes in, is that we now have a longer string that we have to guess. And in truth, none of these are good passwords. They're all pretty awful because they're common substitutions, they're common transformations, and anybody could guess them. They're also really common passwords that people like me like to put into security presentations. So let's say you've gone through all of that to pick a good password that fits all of those rules. Well, it's been 6 months. Time for you to get a new one. Because an attacker, they can't do much within 6 months if they have your password. So we're going to make sure that it rotates out every now and again. Funny thing though, since I'm a user, I probably have a password that looks something like password 1. Guess what I'm going to do when you make me rotate that? I'm going to go with password 2. And in 6 months, I'm going to have password 3 and so on and so forth. It's a really awful way to add any kind of security to your system, and yet it still makes things more difficult for users. Now, where did all of this password common knowledge come from? It didn't come out of thin air. One of the biggest culprits is the NIST SP 800-63 password guidelines. There have been a few revisions of this out there. These are where we get all of this information about whether or not you should have upper and lowercase and how often you should rotate and all of that kind of stuff. A lot of it can be traced back to this government document. But everybody took these rules and sort of incorporated them in different ways. So much so that every time you go to create a password at a site, they have to tell you what their specific rules are. There's all sorts of different interpretations here. In addition to all of these basics of how you need to compose your password, people start to add extra rules as well. So for example, one of the favorites that I see a lot is an upper limit on the length of your password. We're saying that you can only have so many characters in your password before it's too long to be used within this site. Another thing that you see a lot of is limitations on which characters you're allowed to use. So for example, I can't use quotes or hashes or any non-letter characters in this case. But when you see stuff like this, really, to a security researcher like me, it just says, I don't like to sanitize the user input, and so I probably have some injection attacks sitting around my system that I haven't patched yet. All of this password guidance is well-meaning. It's intention to make us more secure. But the kind of attacks that we thought we were protecting against aren't really the same as we see in the real world. All of these protect pretty well from shoulder surfing. You know, it's more complex to remember all of the different bits and pieces. And if somebody shoulder surfs you one day, then they only have your password for 6 months and they'd have to shoulder surf you again. Or brute force attacks, the increased character limit gives you some chance of there being a larger search space. But this isn't where passwords are getting broken. In fact, what instead we're seeing is that people are using extraordinarily common passwords everywhere. Passwords are showing up in breach corpuses left and right. People are using the same password on multiple sites, so if one site is broken, there's a cascade across lots of different systems. We've even got advanced cryptographic attacks like rainbow tables to allow cracking those breach corpuses better. And in a lot of cases, attackers are bypassing the authentication in the first place and going straight towards stealing the sessions from the users. This has really created a worst case scenario where passwords are simultaneously difficult for people to remember, even though it's supposed to be something that I know, pretty easy to crack or avoid, even though it's supposed to be something that's keeping me secure, hard to type, although that's the only way I can get these into the systems, And the length and security of this, the complexity, often doesn't actually matter. Because in a lot of these cases, the attacker has the real password. If they got your password out of a password spray attack or out of a breach corpus or anything like that, the complexity of your password absolutely doesn't matter because they're not trying to brute force it. They have the actual secret. So we can do better. We can make passwords a better authentication factor. And in fact, we see this in the new versions of the NIST guidelines, that same set of documents. Revision 3 was published back in 2017, and Revision 4 is in public comment at the time that I record this. Both of these have some updated requirements. So for example, hash and salt everything. So you're not storing passwords in easily breakable things that rainbow tables can attack. This makes it really hard for attackers to get at information at rest. Don't use complexity requirements because, as we saw, they don't really add to the security, even against a brute force attack, but attackers aren't using those in the first place. So they just make it harder for people to remember and easier for people to pick a bad password that's easily guessed. Allow people to use all sorts of different characters if they want to, but don't constrain them to have to use certain classes. And don't put a limit on your password sizes. If somebody wants to have a 300 character password, you should probably let them, because if you're properly salting and hashing your passwords on storage, well, their password input isn't going to matter. Now, if you have some legacy limitations on what people can input, okay, sure, that can happen. But at the very least, 64 characters as an upper limit for people inputting passwords, you should start there. And you should do better if you can. There's really a lot that you can do to allow people to have a good password. So what makes a good password? Well, a few years ago, a comic strip popularized one particular method that I think is actually pretty good. And the example given here was correct horse battery staple. These are 4 simple, relatively common English words that are randomly chosen and put together with spaces. Now you notice these don't have any uppercase, they don't have any numbers, there's no complexity in here at all. But this turns out to be a really good password, at least in terms of its entropy. So if we run the math on this, we end up with 104 bits of entropy from this simple phrase, largely outclassing everything that came before it that was much more difficult to remember. Now, one of the most important things about this is that it's the length of the password that matters. So sure, you should have a minimum length. And as per the NIST guidelines, that should be at least 8 characters and 15 if you can get it, really. So I should be allowed to enter emojis in my password, but not 4 emojis next to each other because that's simply too short. Even with the vast character space that Unicode gives us, well, that's not going to be enough to prevent really simple kinds of cracking. Another thing to keep in mind is that people are really bad at being random. So choosing a password is not a random activity for a human. If you ask a whole bunch of people to pick a number between 1 and 20, you're going to get some spikes in that data. And those spikes are going to be culturally dependent. This comes from a Western audience, in which case 7 is considered a lucky number. So you get a spike at 7. Interestingly, you also get a bigger spike at 17. The reason for this is that 7 is a lucky number, but 7 is too obvious. So I'm going to pick the less obvious 7 in order to be nice and random in here. And this extends as you extend the number data sets out. The peaks just get bigger and further apart. And perhaps somebody in the comments can posit why we have a huge spike right before 70 when you ask 100 college-age students to pick a random number. I'm not going to go into that right here. But the real lesson here is let a computer do what it's good at and let the computer be random and let the computer pick what it is that you're using as your password. Which leads us to another bit of advice, and that's use password manager. A password manager lets a user have the computer pick the random password and remember it and put it in. And don't rotate on a timed basis. So if you have no reason to believe that a password is bad, keep it around. After 6 months, that password is not any more cracked than it was previously. So don't push it out. You should, however, rotate based on behavior. If you see something sketchy with an account, or if you see something show up in a breach corpus, yeah, absolutely. Kick that password out and reset it, but only based on that. And as far as letting users pick their passwords, well, not everybody's going to use a computer to pick their password for them, so you should always check lists of very common passwords and passwords that you know have already been breached in association with those identifiers. Don't let people pick those most common passwords or stuff that you know is going to be insecure. You can solve a lot of security problems with a really simple block list right out of the gate. The best advice about passwords, though, is to not use passwords. Let me say that again. The most secure way to apply passwords to your system is to not rely on passwords in the first place. Instead, use identity federation to allow people to log into systems. Use delegation to allow people to connect applications to APIs and build their systems together. And if people are coming at your system not very often, well, ask yourself, why are they logging in the first place? Couldn't you just proof them and recognize them the next time that they come in? Because if we look at the data, a lot of people, instead of using a password to log into a site, will use the password reset link in order to log into the site. We can do a lot better at recognizing someone than making them go through this whole process every time. Ultimately, a lot of this comes down to recognizing the device that the user is on. Once you've proofed them, well, you can probably recognize a lot about what's going on. And you might be thinking, this is a different kind of authentication factor than a password. It's not something that I know. Well, how often is a password actually something that you know? Because for most of your users, this is what entering a password looks like. It's going to be entered by the device that they have entered the password into once. And it may have been created by that device too. So remembering the user based on that device is something that you can do more explicitly. And that's one of the things that I really like about technology like passkeys. Passkeys allow us to remember the device in a cryptographic way that's not phishable, but we know that the user is intending to use that particular device. We're no longer pretending that they have something that they know. We now know that it's something that they have. And in closing, I want to tell you it's most important that you understand the context of your security. Take a look at this door. This seems like it's locked. It's got a combination lock on it, and I can tell you from personal experience, if you go up to it and jiggle the handle and pull it, it's not going to open on its own. But if we look right next to that lock, we see that, well, it's not actually a locked door. This is an inconvenient unlocked door because everything that I need to open the door is right there as long as I'm at the door. This is not effectively locked, even though it's using a password. In this particular instance, though, somebody realized this and they decided to add their own second factor of authentication in the form of a key in a heavy chain. So now somebody with a key can open that gate. But the person with the key still has to go through the dance of entering the code on that gate in order to get it to open. So it's an inconvenient doorknob on a locked gate, and the password here doesn't actually add anything to the security posture or anything about the security of what that gate is protecting. At the end of the day, when you need to use passwords, we can do a lot better than we're doing today. Password complexity needs to go out the window, and so does password rotation. But ultimately, what we really need to do is stop using passwords in all the places that we're using them and use better technologies wherever possible.